All right, all we are live, and with me now, a special guest, Dr. Steve Bonta. Uh, Steve, you are the publisher of the New American Magazine, and perhaps one of the only people on Earth to have spent 30 years successfully deciphering the ancient Indus Valley script. You're a scholar of what makes civilizations rise, and more importantly, I think, is what makes them crumble. And we're thrilled to have you on the show here with us. Uh, your work speaks for itself. Um, you know, there's so many things I could ask you. Linguistics, you have a PhD in that. Um, but why don't we talk about sovereignty and the battle of against globalism that it seems like we are in the thick of now. Um, Really, could you sum up the civilizational struggle that the West is facing now?
Well, the term globalism, I mean, according to some people, Steve Turley and others opine that globalism is on the wane and there's a new civilization order arising out of that, where we kind of go back to a more traditional way of looking at the world as being parceled out into the dominions of various competing empires. In the days of Rome, you had Rome versus the Persians and this kind of thing. The British Empire was opposed by the French and Spanish and Portuguese and Dutch empires and so forth. But this modern conceit that really began gaining steam after the First World War is this notion that the future of the world is going to be one world, one global set of institutions, including government. And the United Nations system that we have, which is a sprawling congeries of international organizations, including not just the UN and its key bureaus, but also the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and on, literally dozens of others, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and so forth and so on. All of these are consecrated to this goal that the trend lines all point toward a single world state as being the ultimate outcome. This is where we're headed. This is where our technology is leading us, where our elites certainly want to take us. Now, the question then is this still a thing? I mean, at the one of our calling cards at the New American Magazine has been warning about this trend, which is more than just a trend. It's not something that's just happening. It's being deliberately encouraged and engineered. And so we've been warning about the United Nations and danger and membership of these sorts of global institutions and the way in which they systematically require us to compromise our own independence, and not just ours, but the independence of all other member states in the UN, and that also participate in other transnational organizations, regional arrangements like the European Union and other. They're all part of this same thing. Okay, so the question is this truly going to be the wave of the future, or are we now in an era, as some are maintaining, where globalism is fragmenting and we're going back to a world dominated by traditional empires, like a Russian polarity, a Chinese polarity, an American polarity, European polarity, and so forth and so on. And I tend to think that what we're seeing right now with the Trump administration, which is of course usually trotted out as the primary reason for this alleged tilt away from globalism, may be temporary. I mean, American and European elites keep reassuring each other that, Trump's presidency has an expiration date, and once it's over, by golly, we'll get right back into the climate accords and all the other institutions that Trump has tried to withdraw us from. And so, I mean, I think that's probably correct, because I don't really see Trump, for all of the rhetoric critical of globalism, for all of the alleged America First policies that he's embraced. I don't really see him doing what is fundamentally necessary to truly re-enshrine America First and full national sovereignty, which would be withdrawal from the United Nations. Not, as Trump repeatedly insists, claiming that the UN is a really great idea that's somehow run off the rails and is in need of reform, but just withdrawal from the UN and from other international organizations, the World Trade Organization, and so forth. And beyond that, I mean, speaking of financial survival, it's the world financial network is probably the most insidious because, one of the oldest global institutions is the International Bank of Settlements, or the bank, which is the Bank for International Settlements, which has been headquartered in Basel, Switzerland since the 1930s. And it was set up as originally a project between the central banker of England, Montague Norman, and his good buddy Hjalmar Schacht, the central banker of Germany, of the Nazis really, who decided that central bankers needed to have a way to collude more reliably. And the Bank for International Settlements was the result. And it has become the nerve center of what is now a truly global financial system, dependent in essence upon all of these, not just the harmonization of banking regulations, but of course the ability of central banks to inflate more or less in tandem so they can maintain proper exchange rates and so forth and so on. So all of this is part of the so-called global order too, and it has a very strong tendency to incentivize globalism and internationalism and multilateralism. So it's not just a political movement that we're talking about. And so taking all of this into account, there's some indication that the scales are falling off the eyes of the American public as to the dangers of the system, but it's not clear that we've reached the point where we're willing to say, okay, we're done with globalism, we're going to turn away from it, we're going to return to some semblance of American independence and allow other nations to do what they will.
Wow, you gave me a lot to chew over there. So the concept of globalism, it sounds like what Trump is trying to do is pick and choose the parts he likes the best and maybe get rid of the parts that he doesn't.
Pretty much.
Can you just dump it all at once? Would there be so much unrest and so much chaos, disorder for a period of time that it makes it unacceptable as a political decision? Because politicians do have to consider political ramifications of their actions.
Absolutely, and no, that's very true. So, no, I'm not saying just go out there and set the world on fire and the devil take the hindmost. That's would not be prudent. After all, I mean, we didn't get into this mess overnight, and we're not going to solve it overnight. So, for example, people like myself tend to advocate a foreign policy of non-interventionism. All right, well, okay, that's fine. But what do you tell countries that have become completely dependent on the on the promise of American military protection? Countries like South Korea and Japan and the Philippines, as just one, for instance, and of course, Europe and the NATO alliance is another. Do you simply say, okay, as of tomorrow, we're going to cut you loose? Well, I mean, that would probably not be a wise thing to do. Instead, I think the prudent way to approach this would be to put people on notice and say, 5 years from now, we're going to terminate this treaty and that treaty and so forth, and we're going to expect you to deal with it, to set up whatever regional arrangements you have to, militarily, economically, and so forth. But we're done being not just the world's policeman, but the world's nursemaid. And so, yeah, I mean, just as parents don't, at least wise parents, don't just throw their children out of the house one day. They prepare them for independence. And what's happened has been that the rest of the world has become totally reliant on America, not just militarily, though that's a big part of it, but also financially, with the dollar being the world reserve currency and all the rest of this. This is all part and parcel of this nascent globalism. And it's a system of dependency. Obviously, where finance is concerned, if we were to say tomorrow, okay, that's it, we're cutting off the petrodollars, we're restoring the gold, the gold standard tomorrow. I mean, we're ending the Federal Reserve as of 2 weeks from now. That would, of course, that would be too much. That would completely bring down the house. Again, the prudent way to do this would be to phase it out, would be to acknowledge frankly, that the Federal Reserve System is unconstitutional, that having fiat inflationary currency is also unconstitutional, not to mention bad, financial and economic policy in the long run for various reasons that we can get into if you like. But anyway, and say in effect, okay, this is a 100 years plus mistake. We've been on the wrong track. We're going to correct course, and we're going to do it in a prudent way. I mean, I would anticipate from and I've read various plans for how to end the Federal Reserve, for example, how to end, the income tax and get back to, how to bring the federal government back down to within more or less constitutional limits, and all of them would contemplate, phasing things out over time. It would be a monumental task, but then after all, it was a monumental task getting us into this morass, and so getting us out of it would not. And I would hasten to add, it wouldn't be necessarily a panacea for all ills. There will always be challenges, but at this point, the specter of losing our sovereignty completely and becoming inextricably enmeshed in a globalist system, which would be socialist by its very nature and inimical to both the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, has to be reckoned the greater of two evils.
Yeah, I see your point. But what about in the case of, and you could make the argument, and I wouldn't argue with you, like Iran, basically, the U.S. got them into this mess, arguably bringing in the Shah, the CIA coup in the 50s. But be that as it may, and arguably somehow there was Western intelligence collusion bringing the Ayatollah Khomeini back to Iran to run this thing.
Oh, absolutely.
When you see like this type of human rights violations that this regime imposed upon its people, mass killings, I'm all for non-interventionism. I don't think we should have been in Vietnam. Korea, maybe make an argument. I don't know about that. Certainly, World War I, there's an argument to be made not ever entering that war.
Hindsight's always 20/20, isn't it?
Yeah. But when you see like tens of thousands of people getting murdered by their government, is it right to just not get involved in that?
No, and that's a fair question. So let's talk about Iran for a moment. You're absolutely right that in some sense, what is happening now in the Middle East is the culmination of literally decades of American interference. Because it is true, we and certain powers in Europe, France in particular, colluded to help the revolutionary Islamists take over Iran. Because of the way that the former Shah was traduced as being this evil, right-wing dictator. Well, actually, it turned out he was very anti-communist, which is number one. That's a strike against him in the globalist narrative, right? Another is he was very pro-Israel. That's strike two. So he had to go, right? And so Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran was created by this unholy alliance of radical left communist types in Iran. Don't forget, Iran prior to 1979 was quite similar to Europe in terms of culture, complete with a class of radical bohemian malcontents who were agitating for utopian leftist reforms. And so they forged an alliance with radical Islamists, similar to what the Russians did when the Soviet Union came into being, and they convinced the Central Asian republics to join the Soviet Union. They said, in effect, well, your jihad is just our workers' revolution. It's the same thing. So this red-green alliance is not a new thing, and that's what happened. The thing is that the green got the upper hand in Iran. Mm-hmm. But yes, we definitely bear serious culpability for inflicting this horrific regime on the Iranian people. And I can't say, the human being with the heart in me says, I'm not at all unhappy to see that regime fall, to see the likes of Khomeini get their just desserts, in my opinion. But as with so much of this globalism, the problems always arise where we end up being forced to do maybe the right thing, but using the wrong means. So there's little question, I think, constitutionally, that Trump did embark on this war without any kind of constitutional or legal imprimatur. He just sort of went and started it. And and his argument is, well, if I'd shared what I was going to do with Congress, they would have leaked it to Iran, which is also probably true, given the level of corruption that honeycombs Congress. So it's a very, very vexed issue. And I guess now that we're in it, I would say, I again, with hindsight being 2020, that part of the problem is that, that President Trump very unwisely, in my opinion, committed us to this kind of action when he promised the Iranians, well, he told the government, don't you dare shoot those protesters. And to the protesters, don't worry, America has your back. And the government basically called his bluff and went out and massacred tens of thousands of fine young people. Frankly, these aren't communist revolutionaries or something like that. These are decent young men and women who want the same opportunities that they know people outside the country. And we all know what happened. So he kind of committed us, and we ended up in this situation where he's either going to go back on, he's going to disavow America's promise, his promise, or he's going to disavow to some degree the constitutional limits on the war-making powers. And this often is the issue with these modern conundrums. I mean, I would point out that, there's another giant Islamic country right now, Sudan, which is busily massacring tens of thousands of innocent people, primarily in the western province of Darfur. And this has been going on at the same time, but you don't see the same hue and cry because there's just not that same degree of public sympathy. But, Sudan also has been involved in supporting terrorists. People forget we lobbed some missiles at them back in the 1990s under Clinton. But so it becomes very, very difficult to make these moral choices. The situation in Burma is horrific right now. What that government is doing to its people. And, one could go on. I mean, the injustices are all around the world. And it becomes very difficult to say, okay, so which injustices are the ones that we should be involved in? But certainly we wish the Iranians well, and no one more than me. No one will be happier than me if this turns out all right, if it doesn't turn into yet another Middle Eastern morass.
Quagmire.
And the Iranians, at the end of the day, end up being a free republic. That would be a very positive event for the world at large. The problem is here at home, it does create yet another grievous incentive where the powers of the executive are sort of artificially enlarged at the expense of the legislative.
Yeah, well, the balance of powers and the abdication of congressional power, we could go on days for that. So let's take it to Venezuela.
Yeah.
And by the way, Sudan doesn't have massive oil reserves.
Well, there's that.
And we didn't create that mess directly or indirectly. I mean, that's a colonial vestige, right? That issue. But let's go to Venezuela. It's really the same situation. I live in South Florida, and I meet Venezuelans regularly, and they were so thrilled to see Maduro be plucked out of there. And at least that was a situation where we used, I call it extrajudicial means for resolving that problem. And one other thing that Trump did also is reassert control over the Panama Canal. That purely is an America first thing.
And he's bearing down hard on Cuba too. It's well past time.
And Cuba, and that again is another creation of American policy, and allowing it to go on this long. And look, I thought 25 years ago I would be vacationing in Havana for Christmas. It just never happened. But now we're almost at the point. So I can't say I can't question his globalist tendencies, but it seems like he's just had enough of these situations where American interests are directly involved, and he's just not putting up with it anymore. So you can't just say on the one hand, he's globalistic, but globalistic light. But then on the other hand, he's totally disrupting the global order here, Steve, isn't he?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But I would add that there is a bit of a difference between Iran and the Middle East on the one hand, okay, and Venezuela, Cuba, Panama on the other, and other New World stuff. And that is, to coin a phrase, those latter things are more hemispherism than globalism. And hemispherism is a doctrine that goes right back to the American founding, this idea that America, it was in America's interest. Obviously, it crystallized into the Monroe Doctrine, the original version of the Monroe Doctrine, which was quite simple. It was, in effect, that the United States had a bit of a custodial role for the Western Hemisphere, mostly passive, not open-ended license to go and install dictators as we saw fit, but rather to prevent the incursion of further old world interest in the old world, what they called system of alliances, into the new world. That was something endemic to Europe and perhaps Asia, but that it need not be transplanted here. And so, for that reason, I do think that the Venezuelan actions and what's going on with Cuba and obviously the Panama Canal, a strict, libertarian type non-interventionist would say, well, it's all interventionism. It should all be shunned. My view is probably there's some, the Monroe Doctrine is worth revisiting in some form, maybe not in the enhanced, Teddy Roosevelt version, the Roosevelt corollary as it's called, but in the original spirit, which was effectively that the new world is different, not just the United States, but the whole Western Hemisphere has a fundamentally different heritage. And so it does seem to me that preventing old world ideologies like communism, particularly, from penetrating the new world is probably in America's interest. And again, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, all of the broils in Latin America pretty much originated from Cuba. Started with Cuba and the fact that we were unwilling to do anything resolute to throw out the communists, particularly after they tried to install Soviet, nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. Actually did have them there for a short period of time. Nearly brought us to World War III. After that, one would think that we would have said, okay, we're done with this. We're, it's going to be ugly, but we're going to have to go down there and take care of it. And we didn't. And now we end up with communism proliferating across the Western Hemisphere. Nobody talks about Brazil, but Brazil is a very big problem right now.
Yes.
They literally jailed their equivalent of Trump, and they're being run by a hardline Marxist. And, I'm not sure where things are going to go. If Brazil goes full bore Marxist, we've got big problems because Brazil is not something that can be solved easily and quickly and expeditiously via gunboat and cruise missile diplomacy.
Agreed. And, I've been to Cuba twice, and it is the epicenter. It's the epicenter of communist failure. Nothing in that country works, and the people are the saddest thing I have ever encountered. How beaten down and beaten back they've been. So all these moves, the strategy in Trump, Panama Canal, Venezuela, and Cuba, it was clear to me back in May that this was going to happen. The whole thing of narco-terrorism, of defending borders, all these things. We got time for some questions here. One is if there is a limited tactical nuke exchange, is the next phase depopulation acceleration? That's like going down the rabbit hole here, but
I would say possibly. But there aren't very many countries that have tactical nukes. I know, Russia does. I'm not sure that we actually do at this point. China may have them. Iran clearly does not. So, if the question has to do with the current, unpleasantness in the Middle East, people are talking, well, this is going to morph into World War III. I kind of doubt it. It doesn't seem to me that China has kind of disavowed Iran, and Russia has got problems enough of their own on the Eastern Front in Ukraine. So I'm not sure that this is going. Obviously, it's turned into a major regional conflict. It is a historical. I think it's going to end up being a hinge event. And probably, if I had to give my best guess, I would guess that it is going to lead to dramatic change, not just in Iran, but in the politics, the geopolitics of the entire Middle East and perhaps the whole world. So it is a very significant event that's unfolding. I don't see it verging into a nuclear conflict or an all-out World War III. I think that if World War III ever does start, it would be more likely in the Far East, and not necessarily over Taiwan. Could start in the Korean Peninsula. So,
Korean Peninsula, it could start with the Philippines and Vietnam.
The Philippines, Vietnam, the South China Sea. There are a lot of flashpoints. And again, I lived in China. I lived and worked in China for 4 years. I speak Chinese fluently. I have a Chinese spouse. I know China pretty well. I've traveled all over China. I've even visited Hainan Island, where most of China's South Sea military assets are. I could see the missile launchers from a distance. They didn't let me get close, but I've seen that stuff. And there's no question, China is gearing up for war, A, and B, China does not fit the definition of a rational actor that was sort of a presupposition of this whole idea of the balance of terror and so forth during the Cold War. Because Mao once made it plain that he felt that China would be able to, because of its huge population, could absorb an all-out nuclear war, which the United States could not. And this is something that is entering into the planning of Xi Jinping. Make no mistake about it, they fully intend not only to retake Taiwan, but parts of the Philippines that they consider to be historically part of their heritage, Southeast Asia. They want to neutralize Japan and all the rest of it. And unlike the Soviet Union, the late unlimited Soviet Union, they are not constrained by concerns of, well, if America nukes us, that'll be it. No, they're thinking in terms of, well, if America nukes us, 500 million of our people will die, but that'll still leave 600 million to keep things going, whereas we nuke them back and we wipe them out. That's how the Chinese think. And so this is something that I think Americans outside of the most elite strategic planning circles really fail to appreciate how different and how much more dangerous the problem is vis-a-vis superpower China than it was vis-a-vis the Soviets.
Can't agree with you more. I've been to China, lots of Chinese friends. I've studied the culture, and they do think differently than us. Interestingly, like Vietnam, we had a war there for like over a decade officially, and we're allies now. They never viewed the US as a permanent enemy, but they've always viewed China as an enemy, fighting them for 1,000 years, and that whole global rebalancing. Hey, another question. This one's from Richard. Let's see. He has a few questions here. Let's see. He's just asking, can we be absolutely sure all these people really have been slaughtered in Iran? I mean, I can answer. I've watched various non-mainstream channels who've pretty much documented the killings taking place there.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I don't think that there's really any question. One thing he had is, according to Catherine Austin Fitz, she suggests that Trump was hired to sell the ultimate globalism to conservatives. I mean, what's your feel on it?
Well, I don't know. I think the jury is out. And, within my organization, there's some disagreement on Trump's role. I mean, Catherine Austin Fitz was a featured speaker at one of our events recently. And, I think, generally speaking, it's difficult to be too cynical in one's take on world events and the ultimate motivations that undergird them. I think that Trump is not a nice person, not somebody necessarily that, like most politicians, that I would want to have over at a backyard barbecue. He's very different from me. Let's put it this way. And I think he's made he's done some bad things in his life. That's pretty much beyond dispute. But I do think, with all of his flaws, he seems to be sincere about America first. The problem is, like many money men, is that he knows money and business, but not much else. He's not, I'd be very shocked if I found out that he'd ever read the Federalist Papers, for example.
No.
Okay. And so to some extent, he's at the mercy of those who surround him, who have read, they say that leaders are readers and all that sort of thing, who give him this kind of advice. So I would add this. I think that the second Trump administration is much less larded with globalists than the first one was, as measured by, for example, the number of CFR, Council on Foreign Relations members, trilateralists, Bilderbergers, et cetera. There are very few, comparatively speaking. So I think he's trying to do the right thing. But I would add to that two codicils. Number one, he doesn't always use the right means. For example, the tariffs, which are clearly unconstitutional. But it's definitely, we've got to get back to tariffs if our goal is to shrink the government. Back to constitutional. We have to bring tariffs back. Trump is right about that. but he's kind of going about it in a way that's constitutionally dubious. It's gotten him in trouble. The other thing that I would point out, the other codicil, is that the globalists will certainly try to take advantage of everything that he does. So, for example, with the Iran situation, as this war develops and moves toward the conclusion, which I think ineluctably is going to be the fall of the current, Islamist regime, whatever happens, okay, I think that's going to be the outcome. Well, the globalist faction does not want Reza Pahlavi Jr. back in Iran, because here's a guy who is, again, like his father, anti-communist, pro-Israel, pro-US, wants an independent, free Iran. He's not going to be amenable to membership in the so-called international community, as it's traditionally spelled. So they're going to try to manipulate that and say, okay, all right, well, we want Iran to have a free republic, but it had better have a left-leaning government, just like the Europeans, democratic socialism and all that, so that they can, merge them into the global order comfortably.
Okay, so you mentioned the CFR.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something. This channel, my channel, has been censored by YouTube, Google for over 14 years. And
congratulations.
And I did a deep dive into Alphabet, that's the parent company. And what I found when you're talking about the CFR is that 8 or 9 of their top current and former management are CFR connected or lifetime members. For instance, Eric Schmidt was a lifetime member of the CFR. Kent Walker, their president of global legal affairs, their legal genius who I've been battling myself, lifetime CFR member. Ferguson, who was a member of the Federal Reserve at one time, Robert Ferguson, I believe, could be Richard, is a CFR fellow. The head of technology, Jared, I can't remember his last name, CFR member. Is that a coincidence?
Well, I mean, the establishment types look after their own, and I would not claim that every person who is or at one time has been a member of the CFR is necessarily a conspirator, right, or anything like that, or even a globalist. Pete Hegseth, I believe, was a CFR member for a short time a while ago. He doesn't strike me as being a globalist, at least in the traditional sense of the word. So, so there's that. But it's definitely the case that the CFR, for roughly 100 years, has been America's de facto ruling establishment. That is the group from which not only presidential administrations, every one up until Trump #2, has pretty much drawn all of its most important people, all the secretaries of state, secretaries of defense / war, and so forth, and many of the other, department heads as well, secretaries, are typically CFR members. But they're also, most of the top leader, academic leaders, universities. I mean, I remember Donna Shalala, Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Clinton administration, was a CFR member. Prior to that, she'd been president of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, one of our most elite universities. So and obviously in journalism, they have a very, very large profile. Even Fox News' Maria Bartiromo is a CFR member, and so this is a very, very consequential group of men and women. And the organization, well, I mean, the history is a little bit interesting. We don't need to go into that necessarily, but it was founded by semi-secret, at least semi-conspiratorial global elitists with a very specific goal, which was to kind of help to create conditions amenable to the comfortable merger of all nations into a global state. There are CFR equivalents in many foreign countries now.
Yeah, it's kind of the think tank of the deep state, the
Pretty
CFR.
much.
And like I said, 8 or 9 members, their goal is control the flow of information,
Absolutely.
so facilitate their end goal. Hey, Steve, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you all for your questions. We had like 50 people on here, so I'm really happy with that. We'd love to have you back on, and
Anytime.
I would love to get your historic take on Western civilization, how it emerged, and how it's basically kept all the others at bay for all these years. Just tell us where we find you, how we connect with you on the web.
Well, I'm the publisher of the New American magazine. TheNewAmerican.com is our website. You can subscribe to us. We're a monthly magazine right now. If you're old-fashioned and like to keep old, you can subscribe to the print version, but there's also a digital version you can get. And our website also, we have lots of stuff that's not behind a paywall. Articles and so forth on events, as including, for example, the Iran war right now. So that's free. We also have a weekly email blast called the Insider Report that all subscribers receive as a free bonus, so to speak.
Excellent. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions for Dr. Bonta or myself, shoot me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. I'm throwing it in the chat right now. Feel free to email me, and the site, which is all Substack now, because Substack is virtually immune from censorship, and it's killing the deep state. Substack.com, KHLFSN, Substack.com. Steve, we will talk to you again. Really appreciate you coming on. Quite enlightening, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerry. It's been great.